With that, thank you for joining. Thank you for attending. My name is Saad, based in Singapore. I'm a tech person, but during weekends, I do something a little bit more meaningful, in my opinion. I run a small nonprofit that invites tech people to come and contribute their skills and knowledge and expertise and time and effort towards solving for persons with disabilities. And the group is called Salvage Garden, and that's a bit of a dated reference if somebody's familiar with an Australian pop band. Some heads are nodding, which is great. It's a community started, community-led group. We sort of came together during COVID to try and solve the needs of people who were being left behind. And in Singapore, we found that the need was people needed appropriate devices at home that maybe they didn't have access to otherwise. So building on that, Salvage Garden was a group of volunteers that came together and recognized this need. They felt that, you know, the skills that they have can be put to a little bit more of a meaningful purpose. And I'm pretty sure everybody in the room has had some experience with this. And if you haven't, this is a very good place to start. So the BrailleRap is a device that I want to talk about. It's an open source Braille printing machine. Who here is familiar with open source? Excellent. Who's familiar with Braille? Very nice. So some experience, you know, you don't have to be an expert with this, but the fact that you know what it is already a good place to start. So for those who are not familiar, this is Braille, printed on paper. It's designed to be a non-visual communication language. Does anybody know where it started? The word Braille, where it comes from? Yes? Yes. Who was French? But do you know how old he was when he invented this? Yeah, he's about your age. How old are you? Exactly your age. So if a 17-year-old can come up with a language that is completely unique, I think it's up to us to see how we might be able to take our skills and apply it towards this kind of end. So this was a long time ago. The technology at the time was very different. It was sort of hindered by the limitations of what was industrially available at the time. So, but the way that Braille was made back then has pretty much remained the same. There are ways where you can just do it by hand, use a little pokey device and a stencil, and you're able to write Braille by just making dots. But the machines have not really evolved. There's a lot of need for innovation and input in this space. There are very few people doing interesting things. So the device that I want to show you can do a little bit more than the traditional Braille. Mostly the standard talks about text. So here you can see some examples of more than text. That's a recognizable symbol, I think. I hope. Yes, okay. Next to it, you have these things. So this is the text. And we don't really know because we're using our eyes to try and read something that is meant for closing your eyes. So really, if you want to read this, you have to be able to do it in a way that is not using your eyes. So it's important to recognize that when you see this, it looks weird because you're seeing it. You're supposed to be feeling it. So that's why the language looks a little bit strange. So it's a little bit weird when you see like people's name cards with just dots printed on it without it being raised. I know that's like a positive trend, but it kind of defeats the purpose. So what did I want to say about this? Yeah, the machines that I'm talking about can do a little bit more than just text. Most of the Braille machines that are available have been designed to print one alphabet at a time. And each alphabet is a combination of grid patterns. So you can see that there's 3 rows of dots and usually 2 columns. So that's the 6-dot method. There's also an 8-dot pattern. So the machines that were designed in before digital times, you had, they would print one alphabet at a time, depending on what pattern it was. And they were very good at what they did in the sense that they would produce large quantities very quickly. And that serves the industrial sort of mindset of producing Braille content. But in our case, the machine that I'm going to demonstrate later on, is able to do one page at a time. So this is an A4 size sheet. It goes into the thing, and it prints only one page at one time. That slows things down, yes, but it opens up the possibilities of doing a lot more with what you're seeing on the screen. So if you're printing like line by line, you're not limited to text. You can also do images. Make sense? All right. Who's familiar with the BrailleRap 3D printing? Excellent. Has anybody made a 3D printer? Yes, sort of. That qualifies. Yes. Was it? Yes. Okay. We've got two people who've had experience building a device, which is great. Assembling a printer is a good way to understand how it works, and that I think will be helpful when you try and take a look at how this thing operates. So the very first printer, the grandfather, the granddaddy of all 3D printers, was the BrailleRap. Who recognizes the BrailleRap? Seen this before? Yes. Was it on a Wikipedia article? Yes, exactly. So this picture is taken from 2006. It's on Wikipedia. This was the very first demonstration of how you can invent a machine that is able to produce another machine using the machine that you just designed. So that's the concept behind the replicate rapid RepRap of 3D printers. That's kind of where 3D printing came from. Now we kind of like take it for granted because you just buy the thing, plug it in, turn it on, and then it prints stuff. But the starting point of this was, how might we design a machine that is able to print most of the parts that are necessary to make another one just like it? So it goes all the way back to the design. So if you look at the Wikipedia article, you'll see back in 2006, we talk about this thing cost $10,000 to develop and to design. That was the first one. So we call that the parent. And then using the parent, the $10,000 device, you're able to manufacture the child, which costs 10 times less. Or now you can get one for $500. So back in 2005, 2006, now we're in 2025. You can see how things have changed and improved. There are a lot of different types of 3D printers that have come out. The Prusa is very popular. Bamboo Labs is being the new generation, is flooding the market. So these things are a lot more affordable and accessible, but they all sort of trace their origins back to this family of BrailleRap. And that's actually where we get the name BrailleRap. So the wrap part is because it's using exactly the same software that the original BrailleRap used. So later on, I'll show you a little bit more about the parts of the device, but you can see here the electronics, the brain of it, runs on an Arduino. And that's the same microcontroller that's used for the BrailleRap, both the parent and the child. The software that operates and moves all the machine parts inside is exactly the same software that runs on this. It runs Marlin. Has anybody tried Marlin before? Oh, wow. Okay. That's unexpected. That's very good. We've kind of moved on from Marlin to other flavors of software that runs on the thing, but it is properly open source. So you can go in, fiddle with it. The thing I would recommend doing is going and changing the name of the printer. That's the easiest thing to do. So you can just change Marlin, the name of the printer, to BrailleRap, and you're good to go. Okay. This is a FOSSASIA presentation, so I had to throw in a chart. And this is kind of like, showing you the evolution of different 3D printers. So you go all the way back to the original RepRap back in 2007. It feels like a long, long, long time ago, but if you look at where the Prusa is, it traces its origins back to an open source project. Okay. The context in which I'll be presenting this device is how to make one with your own community. Because it's an open source project, it's not my design. It was started a long time ago by mostly, I think, a team of tech people based in France. And they are the ones who are maintaining braillerap.org, which is the sort of starting point for most of the resources you need to get started. So I've had the privilege to take this machine and the concept of the machine and implement it in 3 different locations. So I want to show you what I've learned from that exercise. So if you are interested in building one of these in your own contexts, you'll know what to look out for. Has anybody been to Bhutan before? No? Does anybody know somebody who's been to Bhutan before? Excellent. Okay, this is good. It is very picturesque, and they call it the Shangri-La, and there's a good reason for that. I thought it was mostly just tourism marketing and so on. When I went there, it's all true. It is a special spiritual kind of place, and I strongly recommend if you have the opportunity to go, please go and visit. It is amazing. It looks like a postcard picture that I got from iStock Photo, but this is a photo I took. Everything just looks like this. It's stunning, amazing. So I strongly recommend going and visiting. But the thing that I wanted to point out is there's very few people who've been there. And the closest we can do is probably find somebody who's already been there or is from there. And the reason for that is the country is isolated. It's hard to get to. It's hard to send stuff to Bhutan. And so if you think about what it is like to live in that country, yes, it is spiritual and beautiful, but getting stuff into the country is incredibly difficult. So for us, we sort of take it for granted. We just, go online, do the shopping, comes from China, it shows up in a few days. We complain about the shipping costs and the shipping time, even though it takes just a couple of days to show up. But in Bhutan, that couple of days is usually like forever. Like the shipping option do not exist. And if there is shipping, it tends to cost a lot of money and it takes a lot of time and it's highly unreliable. So being a remote mountainous country like that, not really having access to the supply chain network that we all take for granted is a unique situation for something that can be manufactured locally. So if you have a 3D printer, you don't need to go and get it from get something made in a factory. So having access to a 3D printer allows you to make something locally, and that's something we capitalized on during my time at in Bhutan. So I worked with College of Science and Technology, so a small group of students who are based in a city that's not the capital. So I've put 3 stars up. And you can see the star at the bottom is near the border to a different country, which is India, where I'm actually from. And so a lot of the supply chain comes from the neighboring country, which is India. And there's a large dependency on equipment and goods coming over the border. Often people just walk across or drive across. So the place where the college is placed is at the border, which is different from the 2 stars on top, which is where the capital is and the airport. So there's only one airport in all of Bhutan, and it's the most dangerous airport in the world. You can't see the place where you're landing. You have to sort of go around the mountain and then land. It's super weird. There's only like 14 pilots qualified to land on that airport. So if one of them falls sick, no flight. But these are the people that I was working with. It's a nice group of internationals. All sorts of people from different countries came together. The context was the Fab Lab conference, which happens every year. This one was hosted by the College of Science and Technology. So it was a collaboration between 3 different groups of people. The Fab Lab Network, the College of Science and Technology, and a team from Japan who were already there setting up their makerspace. The Fab Lab. So this is what it looked like when we went over the challenge. We only had 5 days in which to start building a device from scratch. So what I requested was whoever was participating in this, they would bring in whatever resources they had from whatever countries they were coming from. And this was a good idea, it turns out, because again, like I said, shipping stuff to Bhutan is difficult. So we got a whole bunch of Arduinos, ramps boards, um, stepper motors, rods, bearings, belts, and the rest of it we were able to print in their fab lab. So we had the facility to do laser cutting over there, and we had the facility to do like 3D printing over there. So everything that could be done within their lab, we did there. Everything else that couldn't, we just brought along in our luggage. So it was quite easy to do, mostly because everything that you need is already listed on a website somewhere. So people knew what to bring. And if you have extras of something that costs less, it's okay. You can always repurpose it, reprogram it, and use it for something else. So it basically needs a mindset. And that's actually what we were able to do with the students. We were able to like transfer this idea of being a hacker, being able to think out of the box, being able to reprogram and repurpose what you have access to. And so you make the most of the resources that are available to you where you are. So I don't know how it is in Bangkok, but if you are to go out and buy an Arduino, does anybody know where to go? Yes? There is a physical store. You can go in and buy an Arduino from a shelf. Okay, so that you have electronic stores. Lots of them.
Yeah, it's a puzzle to find it, but it exists.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. And it's similar with Singapore as well. There are physical places where they have them on the shelf. They cost a little bit more than buying them online, but you know that it's there if you need it. With Bhutan, it was mostly construction material. So the kind of electronics that you would get are mostly used for infrastructure development or manufacturing. So that scale of supply, the kind of supply things we had access to were for that kind of industry. The thing that we found useful was, like screws and nuts and bolts and so on, but also was a bit of a discovery that is their version of WD-40. And if you've ever been a maker, without WD-40, there's no point getting started. We also use this as an opportunity to explore a little bit more out of the box. What I found out was because they are bordering India, and there's a sort of like an active trade that happens across that border. If you just walk out of the College of Science and Technology and head towards the border, in about 45 minutes, you'll be able to walk across to another country. But at the border, they have a whole bunch of businesses that are doing secondhand stuff. And we found a shop that was stockpiling old ICT equipment. You probably recognize the scanners. Has anybody used the scanner recently? When we take pictures of everything now, we don't need a scanner. But these devices have the sort of rods that we need in order to make one of these devices. So you don't have to go and find new things. Because we are working with something that is open source and highly flexible, we can adapt the design of the machine to fit whatever parts we have access to. And that's a distinct advantage of anything that's open source in the hardware world. We take it for granted with the software. If it doesn't quite adapt, we just write the bits and pieces and then we make it work. But when it comes to hardware, it's a little bit harder. Hardware is hard. So the box there was to keep only what we thought might be useful, and all the other, like the plastic bits that were proprietary or designed to only work with that thing, we got rid of. So they went back to the e-waste place. But the guy who we spoke to, he was like, yeah, you can have as many as you like. So we got all of that stuff for free. So the context in which we were working was, again, a distinct advantage. I have a small little video to give you a sense of what the space looks and feels like. So if this loads, you'll be able to see, to get a sense of what their space is. It's a fab lab like most other fab labs are, but you don't have to have a lot of complex equipment. So this is sort of like a virtual tour, if you like. So these are the students I was working with, and they were trying to assemble this without reading the instructions. It was so much fun. to watch them figure it out. And they did. They figured it out. I printed out all the instructions that were available online, but the first step they wanted to do was try and put it all together themselves, which is amazing. What I also want to show you is what's going on in the space, and that's important. So right now you have students that are assembling the physical parts according to the sort of pictures that they've seen online. And what's missing here is the electronics, like the Arduino and the power supply and the wiring is not in yet. That's happening at the next table over, being facilitated by another Uber geek. I'll tell you a little bit more about Andre in a second. But those students were more interested in the electronics parts, and the other students were more interested in the 3D printing and laser cutting side. So you're able to like sort of split the teams and work independently and then bring it all back together again. In the meanwhile, we'd made up a list of things that were missing that needed to be 3D printed. So we set them off on the side to print those while we figure out how to assemble the device. One special thing I wanted to point out is that this particular university was researching how to repurpose aluminium. For this particular city, the problem was that they had an excess of aluminum cans that were piling up, and they couldn't get rid of that waste in a meaningful manner. So they were experimenting, how do you take beer cans, melt them down within the space that you have, and turn them into useful objects. So this is what they were doing while the Braille machine was being printed on the site. And there is a relevant story as to why this is important, and I'll come back to that in a second, later on at the end. But that's how you recycle aluminum. You get a whole bunch of Coke, beer cans or Coke cans or whatever, shove them into a melting device, and then pour it into a mold. And you can do that with a small space where you don't really need to have large amounts of equipment to do that. So what you're able to do then is transfer the knowledge from one team to the next. The person on the right is very good with 3D printing. The kids on the left were very happy with taking apart devices that they would otherwise be scared to take apart. So they're the e-waste salvaging treasure making team. The ones in the middle were very interested in working with the the hardware parts. They were experienced with doing woodworking and metalworking. And so what they did was round off the tip of a screw, which is what actually makes the dots on the paper. So each dot is just a rounded screw. It's nothing special or fancy. We go in there with a sample. We show this to the students and we say, okay, fine, come up with a way to make this happen. Here's the documentation if you need it, but how can you make this kind of a dot? So they made like 6 or 7 or 8 different things, had a lot of fun with the machines that was in the space, and they came up with a few options that made sense. Together with a 3D printing guy, they were able to put it together and make the machine work. So later on, have a look at the machine and see how that works. I have to point this out. One of the requirements of this challenge was to find ways to repurpose aluminium. So because the college was doing molten aluminium, they were looking to see whether they could use this machine to print on aluminium sheets. And it turns out that the sheets that you get from a beer can are soft enough that you can put it into the machine and it will do exactly the same thing that you're doing on paper. The advantage there is that it is waterproof, so you can stick it outside. Like you probably have noticed, like usually in lifts, when you have buttons, you have braille on it, and that's made out of metal. So if you have a cheap and cheerful material that's lying around, you can also do something like that without having to have it be manufactured. So you can do signage and wayfinding using beer cans. This was the favorite activity of this whole exercise. You want to guess why? Say again? You can reuse them, yes, exactly. So that meets the sort of like the brief. But the students enjoyed this activity more than anything else because the beer cans that we had were full of beer. So in order to make testing material, they had to be emptied first. And that's all I said as part of our, because we only had 3 days to build this thing. And this is something that never done before. So the whole challenge was 5 days. The first day we spent talking to the special needs schools and the teachers and the context, understanding where this would be used and why it would be useful. The next 3 days we just built like crazy. And then the last day we would have to pack everything up, put it into a bus, and then drive across for 8 hours across mountains to get to the capital where it would be showcased. So it was very intense. So everything had to happen in parallel. So this is the software coding process, which takes a lot of time and doesn't look very impressive on Instagram. So you have people sort of filling in and doing time-lapse photos at the back. But the work that we do with writing code isn't particularly Instagrammable, but we try. Let me show you this little thing. All right, so once the device was barely ready enough to take over to the capital, we had to display this at sort of like a maker fair, science fair kind of event. And you can see here that it is printing on the aluminum sheets that were very carefully emptied out from beer cans. What I found very helpful or meaningful was the brief that was given to the students was, look, we need aluminum sheets to demonstrate at the event tomorrow. They took it upon themselves to drink as much beer as they could. But without being told, they also washed all the cans, cut off the tops, and cut off the jagged edges, and brought a stack of paper the next day. So it wasn't just about slagging off and drinking as much beer. It was, they understood what the brief was. They understood why it was necessary. And without being told, they got it down to exactly the right size. So that kind of understanding is very hard to transfer if you're doing everything online. I think it's the value of being there in person is super helpful if you're able to bring people to the table and in a way that they understand why they are there, rather than just following a set of instructions. They're able to make the project their own. Because the intention was made very clear that, look, whatever we do here, it's not just for the purpose of the challenge. The purpose is that once these weird international foreign type people are done with their showcase, they go back to their own countries. But the device will live in Bhutan. And so it's up to the students to decide what to do with it. So right from the start, even before we joined the challenge, that was set out to be the case. And so I'm very happy that once this event was completed, the students went on to develop the project even further. But I'll show you that in a second. I just wanted to loop back to the beginning. So you remember that image that I showed you earlier, the 2006 one? So the guy on the right who's holding the sign that says child is Vic Oliver. Does anybody recognize Vic? No. The guy in the middle, at the bottom, in Bhutan, is Vic Oliver. He just happened to be at the challenge. I had no idea he was going to be there. He had no idea we were doing this. He had no idea that the BrailleRap even existed. But he's the guy who made the first RepRap child project back in 2006. So Bhutan was the place where it all came together. The students who were there immediately recognized the significance of having him over there. So they sort of jumped into his brain and to find out what he was doing. He, of course, that wasn't the only thing that he was working on. It turns out that Vic has been making other accessibility devices since then. What he's demonstrating on the right is a one-handed keyboard. You can, for the hackers among us, you might be interested in this. It's open source, it's 3D printable, uses a microcontroller that you can reprogram. Doesn't matter if it's Arduino, it can be an ESP32. With one hand and just 6 buttons, you can replace the entire 101 keys on your keyboard. It is possible to do it, and it's downloadable, and it's open source. And that's the guy behind it, and that's the same guy who built the first RepRap. So it beautifully links everything together. But the thing that I want to focus on is the Braille side of things. If you're interested in getting connected with the other projects, do come and see me later on. I have a little table at the end, right next to the Hack Club guys. They're more noticeable than I am. But yeah, come and talk to me about that. I'll link you up. But these two pictures that I'm showing you are from a different event. This event took place 1 year after. And you can see this particular machine does not have the same cool stickers that the first one had. So this machine was built entirely by the students that we worked with. They only reached out to us when they were stuck with a particular problem, and we were able to help them out with just Zoom calls. So they have made another machine. They decided to do it just as transparent as the first one. It doesn't have to be transparent. You can make it out of plywood or MDF or whatever material is accessible to you. Any questions so far? Okay. How am I doing for time? Excellent. Thank you. I think we're doing great for time. All right. Jumping into a little bit more about lessons learned, I'll show you a couple more examples of the different devices, and then we'll go into questions. I would like for you to feel free to ask any type of question. No question is too silly for at least the next 25 minutes. Okay. So the device that you're seeing over here is slightly wider than the one that I have. So this one can print on A4 size. The one that the students decided to build afterwards was even wider. But you want to guess why? Why did they make it bigger? Exactly. When you print dots on a piece of paper, each dot takes up more space than a printed out alphabet. So the amount of space, the amount of text information that you can fill into one page is quite small. So you need lots of pages. And if your page is bigger, then you can fit into more information. And it turns out that the standard for textbooks that are made in Bhutan and most places that have Braille textbooks, they use a double standard. Instead of using A4, it's A3 or roughly around there, something in between. So it's a larger piece of paper that goes into the machine. And they were able to do that using the same resources that we used to make the A4 size. They applied their own skill and judgment to make the adjustments necessary. Because the files are digital, they're able to modify them. So the box of this thing is using vector files, and because they are laser cut, you can increase the size and then just cut them again. The parts inside are all 3D printed. Like you saw in the previous picture, you can just make a box of these things and they're printing on the side. So if they don't quite fit or you need more of them, you can change the size and the shape of the 3D printed, the 3D model of the file and then print it again. So that's the approach that they took to make a bigger version. And what's happened then is that work is now back into the BrailleRap project. So now there is a bigger version of BrailleRap that's available. So if you are interested in the larger size, you don't have to redo the work. The work is already done and it's part of the main repository already. So there is an XL version of the BrailleRap. It's still under active development. So if this is an area that you're interested in contributing to, now is a very good time to do that. So this looks pretty much the same, but it's actually much wider. Okay, so if you want to get started with, if you need the reference for all of the work that was done in Bhutan, it has its own repository. The links over here will take you to the repo. Later at the end, I will give you a QR code that's easier to scan. But the guy who was responsible for writing the software that we wound up using, Andre, who was working with the students with the electronics, he basically decided that the software that was available as per the documentation wasn't good enough. And this is, I think, something that is very FOSSASIA, or very FOSS community, where you see somebody else's software and say like, yeah, no, I can do better than that. So Andre did that, and he decided to rewrite the software in 3 days, and he did, and it works. And it's mostly written in TypeScript. Who's done TypeScript? Yes, outstanding. Okay, so if you look at the BrailleRap UI repository, it's all done in TypeScript. This opens up two new opportunities, which is that if you want to change from English to say Bhutanese, or even Thai, or French, or any other language, all you have to do is go in and change the language file, and you're good to go. Everything else will work. The software is open source, and so you can change whatever you need to change. This is the QR code. Will take you to the link for all the resources that we put together. The Braille machine was just one small part of the aluminium recycling things that we did. The team actually came up with a whole bunch of resources for helping children with disabilities and special needs. What you're seeing on the left is a map of where to find other instances of this device. And if you zoom into the Southeast Asian side, you'll see that Thailand is not part of that map yet. So my hope is that at the end of this session, you will help find somebody in Thailand who is interested in replicating this project. By interested, I mean we have a use case, meaning that it is actually going to help somebody who can read Braille and print Braille. That would be amazing, yes. So just keep that in mind, and if you have a resource, then I'll be happy to talk to you more about that later on. All right, so talking a little bit about the Singapore context. I'm based in Singapore, and the group that I mentioned, Saad Garden, we operate out of a public library. Singapore is lucky in that we have public libraries where 3D printing is available to everybody. There are only 4 library branches. This is the newest, shiniest, and the coolest looking. You might have seen this because it looks very Instagrammable. So a lot of these pictures have been floating around, but it's a 5-story building. The first 2 levels are for kids, and then you have teenagers in between, and then you have the adult section on top. The makerspace that I do most of my work in is on level 4, which is the adult section. But what I want to point out is special, apart from it looking Instagrammable, is that it's accessible. It's designed for accessibility, and not just wheelchairs and access ramps. We're talking about all kinds of disabilities that might not be visible. So yes, it does cater to people with visual impairments and audio, hearing impairments, but also intellectual disabilities and so on, which might not be obvious at first, but this is a very good example. So if you're coming to Singapore to visit Saad Garden, also have a look at the library. It is totally amazing to come and see. So this is what our space looks like, to give you a sense of how we do our work. It's nothing too fancy. It looks a bit like a classroom, but over the wall in the back, you can see there are a whole bunch of 3D printers. Those machines are available to the public, meaning that anybody can go in and book some time and print whatever they want. It doesn't have to be like for printing things for people with disabilities. You can just print keychains, you can print decorations, you can print like birthday gifts, whatever it is that you want. It's part of the library. But on Sundays, on weekends, this volunteer group comes together and we sort of take over that space, and we focus our efforts and time on more meaningful projects and helping persons with disabilities. So that's our context, and that's where we sort of assembled and built this machine. And to my knowledge, this is the only machine that has ever been built in a library. But if you know somebody else who has, please let me know. I'd love to work with them. But so far, yeah, we seem to be unique in that aspect. I mean, whatever that means. What we learned from Singapore that is quite strange and might be useful for you for other projects is a lot of the parts that are inside here, sometimes they are hard to find for whatever reason. In Singapore, it wasn't that the parts were hard to find. It's just that I was working with some students who didn't want to go and find the parts. So they, instead of going to the store in Bugis and Simlim, they went online to search for something that they can print. And I was very skeptical of this because the parts that they were looking for was this black belt that moves the head left to right. And the belt is very commonly found in 3D printers. But it turns out that you can 3D print it. And because these students had access to 3D printing, they tried it out. And I was very skeptical, but it turns out it worked. So if you need a belt, a GT2 belt, which is quite common for like moving things around, you can print it out of TPU, and it works, which is quite surprising. This was helpful for the Bhutan team, even though they had plenty of belts to work with. Knowing that you can 3D print a belt like that makes it that much easier to try new things out. So this is what our setup looks like. The people in Singapore, they really do like unicorns and rainbows. So we try and decorate our devices with as many stickers as we can. This is the second device. This is the first one. All right. Very quickly, I'm going to show you an example in the Philippines. This was, again, just to show you the differences between how we do things in Singapore versus how I showed you in Bhutan and how this looks like in the Philippines. I hope you find that informative in making the necessary adaptations for your local context. It might be that you are connected to a makerspace in a company or makerspace in a university, which might not be publicly accessible. And if you've been to more than one makerspace, you know that they are completely different. Some places have 3D printers, some places have laser cutters, some places are incredibly loud and noisy with woodworking, some places are incredibly smelly with like metalworking, other places are very neat and clean and shiny like the mold makerspace. So this little makerspace in Manila is actually sharing the space with a furniture manufacturer. So they are doing things like 3D printing lamps, and that's how they're able to sustain themselves. But they were interested in doing like a meaningful project, applying their skills towards something more meaningful. And so I was able to build this machine together with those people. There were just 3 people who were working with me on this, and we were able to do it within a week. The team in the Bhutan was much bigger, and they were all engineering students. But in this case, we had some accidents. Does anybody recognize what's in the red circle? So what you're seeing is an Arduino. It's not the official Arduino. This is what we call the China Special. But it's hard to see in this picture, but this point here, yeah, yes, that's where the magic smoke comes out. So while we were connecting up the wires, the plus and minus was reversed. And so it was like a puff of magic smoke. So then became a question of like, where do we go to get a replacement Arduino? Because this makerspace doesn't do electronics. They only do 3D printing of lamps and furniture. So then we went out hunting for electronic stores because we only had a short period of time. We found a hardware store, which is great, but no Arduinos. And the thing that actually we needed, luckily I brought along an extra Arduino, so it's fine. But the thing that we needed to prevent the magic smoke from being released again was a diode. And so we weren't able to quite find that. We also didn't have access to wires. Does anybody recognize this? Yes? And if you've done Ethernet cabling, you know that it has pairs of wires. And instead of going out and buying single wires, the hack here was you take an Ethernet cable, cut it apart, and you've got lots of wires. And what's beautiful is they're usually color-coded. So instead of going out and buying different wires of different colors, just buy one of these cables and cut it up. Which is a brilliant hack. We were able to get back on the road. You can see the hack on the top right corner. It repurposed quite a lot because no electronics. And that's actually the same board that we have here. So you can come and take a look. So those are the 2 wires that got short circuit because it didn't have any insulation. All right, so that was one learning from the Philippines. The other thing that happened was The person in the picture, because he was employed by this makerspace to 3D print lampshades, which was how they sustained their space. He was like, look, we don't have a laser cutter. Can we just 3D print it? So instead of laser cutting the outside and having access to a laser, what he did was spend that time redesigning the laser cut parts so that they can be 3D printed. So if you have just one machine instead of two machines, you now have a starting point for 3D printing your way out of not having access to a laser. So the files for this particular model are not publicly available yet. He's a bit of a perfectionist. He wants them to be just right before he uploads them. But there is an option that is available. Somebody's actively working on it. If this is something that you need, let me know. I'll link you guys up. The opportunity here is then you can have like an entirely 3D printable version of this box, which will be accessible to some people. You'll see the patchwork over here is a little bit weird because the printers can't really handle this large of a space. Most of the commercially available printers are able to handle about half. And so what we've done is work around that problem, print them in two halves, and then stick them together. So if anybody's done 3D printing, you're probably already familiar with this. But those who haven't, this is a wonderful way of jumping into printing things that are bigger than your printer. So this is what the machines look like. You have the Singapore version standing next to the Philippines version. We followed the same instructions as before, the same ones that we did in Bhutan, and make the necessary adaptations as we go. And when you have a working version that is transparent sitting next to you, it's a lot easier to accelerate the building process. I mentioned in the brief of this talk that there was another country that normally most people don't think about, Cameroon. So the reason I was in Manila was not to actually build a Philippines version of it. It was for a particular conference similar to FOSSASIA, where it was called the Build Peace Conference. And we had a delegation from Cameroon who wanted to build a machine. So instead of us building it in Singapore and just sending it to Cameroon, the invitation was, come to the Philippines, we'll make one over there, and you can learn from that experience and take back the knowledge on and whatever parts you need. So instead of giving it to them, it was a knowledge exchange exercise. And we basically used the funding for the conference to make that happen. So it's a bit of a hack. If you're keen on finding funding for this kind of thing, you sometimes have to work with whatever you have. So this device is here now. It wasn't sent to Cameroon, but the team that learned from the experience is actively now working on building one in Cameroon. So if anybody has connections there and is keen on doing this, please let me know. I'll connect you up. This is what came from the Cameroon exercise. They didn't have enough time to actually spend building the thing, but during our time in the conference, we were able to replicate the online repository, the one that was built in 3 days by that one guy. So the Bhutanese version is now hosting the software side for the Cameroon side, and everything links back to GitHub. So if you're looking for a place to start and you're shy about jumping into the hardware side and you're comfortable with the software side, just replicate the front end and you'll be fine. It'll be a good place to start. So the underlying message behind all of this is try to be inclusive, not in the sense of like thinking about disabilities specifically. My request is that you think about how to include people that are not otherwise comfortable with doing what you are already comfortable with. So you might be very good at software, somebody else might be really good at Arduino, somebody might be really good at 3D printing, somebody might be really good at documentation, social media, teaching, finding ways to communicate with people with different disabilities. All of these are valid ways of contributing to the project. It's not just about bits and pieces, downloading things and contributing to GitHub. Try and step away from that model as much as you can. That's kind of what we're trying to do in Singapore, and we seem to be having a positive influence. This is something that I learned, that we can't do this. We can't put up a sign outside the library that says no douchebags allowed, because that's not inclusive. But that doesn't mean that we invite douchebags into the process. And it doesn't mean that we celebrate them. And it doesn't mean that we stop listening to everybody else just because somebody is screaming their heads off. But we can't put up a sign that says no shouting. So we're still struggling with this. How do we be an inclusive space without having to resort to weird exclusive policies like this? If you have ideas of how to go about doing that, please do let me know. But I am a tech person, so I rely on my tech background to see how I can learn from the models that I'm familiar with in the tech space and apply them to what I'm trying to do in the inclusion space. Is somebody familiar with this model? Okay, excellent. This is now achievement unlocked. You're now familiar with the community side of open source projects. We're all comfortable with GitHub and repositories and handling conflicts and resolving conflicts as far as the code is concerned. But the user side is something that we can now look at a little bit more. So these are roles that otherwise you wouldn't normally think about in an open source project. But in order for a project that is open source to succeed, you need to have these kinds of users. So like I mentioned earlier on, you might have people who are interested in the bits and pieces, the tech side of things, but you also can include people who are teachers, educators, caregivers of persons with disabilities. All of those people have an opportunity to come and join in. So just the same way that we would consider different users and different roles, try and consider people who are not necessarily tech people and bring them into the co-creation process. So that's the formula, the magical formula that we've been applying. And I strongly recommend trying this out. We've been doing this for 2 years in Singapore, and it's working really well. It's creating a lot of impact. It's incredibly meaningful work. We take the idea of digital fabrication, which is 3D printing and laser cutting. We combine it with open source, which is like repositories and things that you're familiar with. And we introduce this idea of co-creation, where instead of you making for somebody and then just delivering it, you ask that person to come in, sit next to you, and then you make it together. They might not actually have the skills, but the fact that they're sitting next to you makes all the difference in the world. Okay, move on. All right. So now for Thailand. The question now is, how might we learn from this particular project and invite participation from people that you interact with locally and see if there is a need for this. We were very fortunate with FOSSASIA yesterday. I got to meet a very impressive group of young people who are also in the room, which is excellent. The Hack Club people presented their work yesterday, and a small group of students has expressed an interest in making one of these devices. Initially, I thought that I would have to do a lot of outreach work before I found somebody, but we already have interest, which is great. So if we can build on this and amplify it, it will be amazing. The students who are interested in doing this as part of their coursework, I imagine, will need all the support that they can get. So if you can do that, speak to Hack Club. They're right next to me in the exhibition area. Also wanted to point out, there was a gentleman from Cambodia who stopped by, and he has built a web-based translator that can do Khmer to Braille, and it has no connection to the machine that prints it out. It's basically just a translation app, and this was funded as part of some other project. But he immediately, when he saw this machine, he was like, this is amazing. We can combine these two ideas together. So this, I don't know if it is open source or not, but because ours is based on TypeScript, if somebody is interested in putting the Khmer character set into it, there's already a need for that now. There's somebody who wants to make this happen in Cambodia. All right, so just to wrap up, bringing it back to what we started off with, there's a lot to the Braille beyond just the language. Even though Braille is something that we like to talk about, and it's been around for so many years, the way most people who are visually impaired or blind, they navigate their day-to-day is using screen readers. They listen to what is being displayed on the text on the screen, much the same way as we would rely on looking at what's on the screen. So it's mostly audio based. So things like audiobooks and screen readers do most of the work, but that doesn't mean that there is no need for printed materials. The same way that, just because we have our screens now, we stop printing things on paper. It doesn't happen that way. The same thing with the Braille. The need for the printed material has transformed. It has not been replaced. So that's something I just wanted to point out. The software can do shapes, which is different from just text. And the text that you were seeing that in the initial example, if you look a little bit closely, you'll see it's not in English. The names of these animals are in French. So when you look at them in Braille, you can't really make out because you're using your eyes. Okay, so that I just want to wrap up again. That's the BrailleRap XL. That's the BrailleRap A4, and that's the version that I have here. Given the time that we have, I don't think I can go into like the team building exercise. What I will do instead is I'll plug this device in and run the software on my machine. So you can come and try it out, ask questions, and then we can go that way. Is that okay? All right. Right. Thank you.
Suggestions to kind of have printed out material sort of fed back into the machine so that it can kind of continuously print something over time. Should that be something like a useful modification?
Like printing back on the same material that went through the machine.
So that it can kind of reset the material at the same time, print again over what was already printed on previously.
Interesting.
Like a reverse kind of.
I hear what you're saying. For that, you would have to erase what was already printed before, right?
If I use or use different material, like certain kinds of plastic, kids have these machines for
Yeah.
press
Yeah.
and it press back. So
Yeah.
something as flexible as that
Silicone.
can be overused too much over time, but I think
Yeah.
can be resilient enough to keep going.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting idea. You can develop that separate from this device. You can probably borrow some of the ideas from here and then apply it on a larger scale. But in our case, we want to use low cost and accessible materials. So yeah, it's a one-off process. But that's an interesting idea.
I don't need Mike. How is the TypeScript? Obviously, you probably use React, but how is the TypeScript integration with the hardware? Is it tricky? Because I'm seeing a little bit more TypeScript-based IoT stuff happening.
Yeah.
Is it like somebody drank a lot of coffee for
Yes.
a few days?
Yes.
Yeah. I believe it.
But the advantage we have, I mean, I'm not the right person to answer this, but the advantage we had was web serial.
Oh, yeah, I know. Like there is a React package, some serial, but I'm sure there's something else too. Yeah, it's something I've kind of been looking at. So it's like, for certain printers. So I'm curious how you approached it because try to look at looking and even using AI as a crutch to answer questions. There's not a lot of it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The area is still relatively new because the web serial module is still relatively new. But the advantage we have and the thing that's driving its development is all of these new microcontrollers that are being used in schools. So the PVC microbits is very common at the primary, secondary school level. That's how kids are now learning how to do programming. And in Singapore, this is very commonplace. There is a web version so they just open the thing that they in the browser and then connect it and program it accordingly. So it simplifies the process. You don't have to muck around with drivers. So as long as the USB device is recognized as a USB device, then you can handle all of the protocol levels within the web stack. So that is a distinct advantage now that we didn't have access to before. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, as long as the is recognized by USB by the system, then there are options available for TypeScript to take over. Yeah.
Just wondering how just wondering how you send the files, like in what format. For example, in the case of 3D printer, you will have the object in SQL file, then you need to somehow convert it to G code so the printer can print.
Yeah.
I guess it would be similar here,
Yeah.
right? So you would have some sort of source file that has to be translated to G code.
Yeah.
And then you read the G code there, right?
Yes. I think you've just answered your own question. But
yeah, but I don't know what kind of file you use as source and what is the translator program that you use.
So the web interface takes in text. So you type in text here, for example, and you hit generate. When you hit generate, you'll see the dots on the right-hand side. These dots are the arrangement of where this machine needs to move and make an impression. And because this thing moves and presses one dot at a time, one row at a time, it follows exactly the same instructions that you would give to a 3D printer. Except in this case, we don't have the 3 dimensions, we only have 2 dimensions. So you've got left and right and top, up and down. So that's 2. And then for making the impression, it's just an action either on or off. So it follows G code.
So this is almost identical G code.
It is G code. It is exactly G code. So what this web application is generating is G code. So it shows you what the G code looks like here in terms of dots. But when you hit print, it will send that G code as G code over the USB serial to this machine. And because this machine uses the same firmware, Marlin, that reads G code and interprets G code, it is exactly that. So there are other web-based software that you can use to generate G code like this.
So the G code layer of the printer is exactly the same. Right?
Yes, it remains exact.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we didn't have to work that.
Yes. So in the case of Marlin, there are some modifications, mostly to turn off the things that we don't need. So the Z-axis is not relevant anymore. So the flavor of Marlin that we're using here is a limited version of the main 3D printer. So if you're familiar with Marlin, you can probably make the same modifications again from the original source. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.